In this way, Kaufmann feminized the genre and changed art history in the process. But her reputation has suffered since because of the weakness of her anatomical knowledge, which the Royal Academy had not helped her rectify. And if painting in the grand manner was difficult, without training in life drawing, another art form, sculpture, would surely be impossible. Not quite. In 1784, a sculpture by a woman was accepted for exhibition by the Royal Academy. So how on earth did she manage it? Anne Seymour Damer was unconventional, self-reliant, cosmopolitan and privileged, and she drew on all these advantages to take on the ultimate male preserve in art and emerge as the first female sculptor in Britain. The River Thames near Henley is the unlikely home to two of Anne Seymour Damer's public works, although getting a good look at them can be tricky.
Damer carved the two keystones on either side of Henley Bridge in 1787. On this side, we've got the river god Tame. We can tell he's of the river because of the fishes in his beard and the bulrushes at his temple. On the other side, we have his female counterpart, Isis.
They are easy to miss, but they represent the intriguing story of what a woman had to risk and withstand to leave her mark. From the first, fate dealt Anne an unusually promising hand. She was born into a powerful and enlightened family. Her father was a statesman who employed the philosopher David Hume as his secretary. Her aristocratic mother befriended leading artists. As their only child, Anne was lavished with the kind of learned and worldly education normally reserved for men. But her unusual interest in sculpture was only ignited by chance. Out strolling with David Hume, they encountered an Italian boy carrying plaster model figures.
Hume stopped to admire the boy's models, but Damer was sneeringly dismissive to Hume's annoyance. He chided her, "I bet you can't produce anything better." Her pride was then piqued, and she was determined to prove him wrong.
Resenting the implication, she got hold of tools and a block of marble to demonstrate her skill. Her indulgent parents paid for tuition from practicing sculptors and from an eminent surgeon and anatomist. Anne now had the very knowledge that the Royal Academy denied to women. But her career was barely off the ground before it was derailed by what can best be called an unfortunate marriage.
Aged 17, Anne was married off to the son of a lord, John Damer. It was not a love match, and the lack of sympathy was confounded by his gross extravagance and massive gambling debts. After 7 years, her patience ran out and she separated from him, inviting public censure. But far worse scandal was to come. 2 years later, in 1776, in a pub near here in Covent Garden, after a long night's entertainment with 4 prostitutes and a blind fiddler, John Damer put a pistol to his head and shot himself.
Rising from the ashes of scandal, it was in widowhood that Anne Damer's career began to take off. The style she adopted was neoclassicism, as befitted her avid study of Latin and Greek.
This is a marble bust of the actress Elizabeth Farren in the guise of the muse of comedy and idyllic poetry, Thalia. So she has a bit of classical drapery over her bosom, and she's crowned with a wreath of ivy leaves. So in many ways, this is quite a conventional bust. But remember, it's created by a woman, and a formidably educated woman at that. And Damer wants to make sure that point is remembered. So she's chiselled on the side, in Greek, Anna Damer of London made me. What she's asserting here is that there's substance behind her classical style, that she's a thinker as well as a maker.
The bust was praised, but Damer, going on to further works, was now encroaching on the territory of her male contemporaries. And they responded, and not with any generosity. Gossip bubbled about her appearance. One painter, Joseph Farrington, reported in his diary in 1798, "The singularities of Mrs. Damer are remarkable. She wears a man's hat and shoes, and a jacket also like a man's. Thus she walks about the fields with a hooking stick." He insinuated that her close friendships with women were sapphic.
Claire, what is this?
So this is a bust of Mary Berry, who was Anne Seymour Damer's great friend and a respected amateur writer in her own right. What's rather lovely about it, though, is on the headband she's inscribed their names, Maria Berry and Anne Seymour Damer. They seem to have been soulmates together. They write incredibly charged letters to one another, and they certainly seem to have seen each other as their main source of support and emotional comfort.
Clearly, there was some passionate attachment between the two of them. You know, whether or not it's a sexual attachment, you know, I suppose who can know?
That's the big question in the 18th century. And these rumours originally appear in the press in the 1770s with scurrilous poems saying about how fair Italia's maids have felt the pressure of her hand, the pressure of delight. So, I mean, they're quite full on.
Yeah.
Maybe these accusations about her sexuality are more to do with a deep cultural uncomfortableness with the idea of a professional woman sculptor.
The scandal around Damer only grew when in 1789 her skills put her in the firing line once again. She accepted a significant commission for the exterior of the Drury Lane Theatre, a statue of the god Apollo, the male body in public and 10 foot high. Her Apollo no longer exists, but what remains is the scurrilous cartoon it provoked. Damer is depicted carving the naked bottom of her Apollo and wielding her mallet with emasculating force, while prudish classical figures look on, hiding their genitalia, worried for their own manhood. The cartoon was humiliating, but Damer had fought too hard to be dissuaded by mockery. She went on to model national hero Admiral Nelson, and even King George III himself. And the Royal Academy showcased 34 of her works over 3 decades. So Anne Damer stands as one of the few female artists whose work could actually be seen by the 18th century general public. Another one was, of course, Angelica Kauffmann, who had already achieved her place on the male-dominated gallery walls, but had ambition that lay way beyond them. She had a shrewd understanding of the new technologies and the untapped markets for art they could open up. A good printmaker herself, Kauffmann saw the revolutionary power of reproduction. A single etching or engraving of her work could be printed off in the hundreds, seen in any print shop window on the high street. The marketplace for decorative art was also ripe for the taking. Angelica Kauffmann, mass-produced in 3D.
This decorated porcelain represents the very top end of her merchandising. These are German
from Meissen, and this is from Worcester in England. Kaufmann struck all sorts of deals, allowing her paintings to be reproduced in prints, but then transferred onto an array of objects, from teapots, cups and plates, to fans, to snuff boxes, to pieces of furniture, even to commodes. And in this way, Angelica's imagery reached down to the middle market. As one printer and engraver said of her, the whole world is Angelica mad. Kaufmann's ease with industrial design took her art onto the breakfast tables of the polite and commercial classes and made her extremely rich. Manufacturing and trade drove art in new directions. Industry offered fresh possibilities for women to take their art to the world.
Textiles were the most vivid and ubiquitous source of colour in 18th century Europe. Not everyone could wear patterned silks, but almost everyone had glimpsed them.
While the wealthy bought embroidered silks in huge amounts for their grand homes and their wardrobes, in the industry itself, most women were relegated to the low-paid, low-status roles, spinning and winding. The weavers and designers were typically men, protected by their guilds. But then a woman came along whose sheer talent overcame the prejudices of a male-dominated industry. She is one of the great unsung heroes of British design, and she lived and worked here in Spitalfields in East London. Her name is Anna Maria Garthwaite.
She defined the English style and clothed her world in cutting-edge design and brilliant colour.
Garthwaite's moment had come because the British silk industry was being eclipsed by its great rival, France. The male weavers of Spitalfields had not found a way to compete convincingly.
I've got here a mere selection of over 800 watercolour designs by Garthwaite. Being able to paint flowers and watercolours, this is a typical female polite accomplishment in this period. But to be a designer, you have to understand how to lay out a design with mathematical accuracy. Here she's laid her designs onto squared paper to aid the weaver. On top of that, she has to have an understanding of how a two-dimensional design like this is going to look in a very different material altogether. Just because something looks good as a watercolour, it does not follow that it'll look great in textiles. And there are messages on her designs for the weavers. This one has reminders of what the colours must be on the flowers. And this extraordinarily ripe, exotic design has instructions on the bottom. The white in the flowers will be brocade. What's impressive to me about all of this is evidence of the way that Garthwaite used a traditional female talent, watercolour painting of flowers, and translated it into an industrial product.
Researching the history of female creativity has its challenges. In this case, there's a great legacy, but the woman herself is an enigma. The very few scraps of evidence about Garthwaite's childhood, a vicar's daughter in Lincolnshire, demonstrates some education in amateur art. Here's a paper cut made when she was just 17. It reveals her flair for working precisely on a minute scale, sheer draftsmanship, as well as her keen eye for repeating pattern. When her father died, it seems that Garthwaite was left a small legacy, which she took along with her talent on a wing and a prayer to London. Here Garthwaite set herself up in the heart of the silk weaving district in the East End and got down to work designing watercolour patterns for the weavers of Spitalfields, who used them to create some of the most desirable fabrics of the 1730s and 40s. I met with textile curator Claire Brown to discover how Garthwaite became so prominent in a man's world.
Claire, Garthwaite was commended for introducing the principles of painting into the loom. Is that just airy flattery, or does it have some technical purchase?
I think to some extent it reflects what a very fine artist she was, but it also may refer to, for example, a particular technique that she introduced from the French industry, a technique called point rentré. It was a way of feeding lighter and darker shades of colour into each other so that you get a sense of a three-dimensional curved form, and it allows you to have the curve in a petal or a piece of fruit.
Do you think it was hard for her to break in to silk design?
Curiously, some of her designs have the inscription sent to London before I came down, and of course they wouldn't necessarily have needed to say they were by a woman.
Yes.
And so a possibility is that these designs were shown to weavers or mercers. Would you like more where this comes from? And then the weavers or mercers were hooked by this extraordinary talent and carried on patronising her even though she was a woman.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that a male agent might have acted for her.
It's possible. It was a very male-dominated business. The Weavers' Company was all about men.
Yeah. It's rather fantastic then, isn't it, that, you know, one of their most successful designers was a woman?
Yeah, and entirely, I think, reflects her extraordinary talent. They knew that they could be confident that she would produce designs they could sell to their most important customers, and that's the crux of it.
Garthwaite's designs were not only sported by the fashionable around town. Thanks to the British dominance of trade, her fabrics were in demand across Europe and even in America. Here, a Garthwaite silk is proudly worn by Mrs. Charles Willing, a Philadelphia matron, a demonstration of how Garthwaite truly dressed the world.